This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
Oh, what an attack! What a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
It's Game Night. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board is open. 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. We got to talk Flyers. That embarrassing loss last night. Sixers. Elton Brand speaks. What's next for Philadelphia? Jason Blevins, our 97.3 ESPN Sixers Insider, will join me coming up at 6:40. Dive deeper into what Elton Brand said. Maybe do a reading in between the lines about what might be next for the organization. Of course, we'll also touch on what's going on in the NBA tonight, for those who may not have heard. So we got some injury stuff going on. No Kristaps Porzingis tonight for the Clippers and the Mavs. You can hear that game tonight on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins at 8:30. You know, the next game for the Lakers and Blazers, Dame Lillard's been ruled out for that game. Wait a minute, what? You hear that game as well tomorrow night on 97.3 ESPN. Because we got you covered for all the Flyers playoff run, the NBA playoffs, and more. Just because the Sixers are out of it doesn't mean that we're not still tracking the NBA playoffs for you. And it's a little frustrating, you could say, that you have all these guys dropping with injuries. But you know what? It's 2020. We just got to accept that this is sports right now, right? Everybody's got a little tweak here, a little tweak there. Porzingis, they hope to be back for tonight, but he's not going to be back. Dame Lillard, I'm a little surprised with the knee sprain for Damian Lillard. That thing's got to be a lot more serious than they're letting on. Excuse me, because Lillard is one of those guys who plays through everything, it seems like, right? He's a guy who, you know, remember he had the thumb issue, playing through it. You know, he gets banged up, beaten up. CJ McCollum's basically playing with a broken back right now. So we know those Portland guys are tough as nails, and for Lillard to not be able to play the next game is huge. So we got a lot to get into this hour. Again, PlaySugarHouse.com. PlaySugarHouse.com. Try that again. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Before we touch on the Flyers, I did want to touch on a couple of the things that Elton Brand said today. And Elton Brand is one of those guys that I personally am very happy that Elton Brand is the GM, because I'll be honest with you, I was not a huge fan of the last two GMs. Actually, if I'm really going to dig deep, I respected Rod Thorne a lot, but I don't know if he was maybe the best guy for this organization back when he was here. And you could even go back to GMs before that. Has Philadelphia really had a great GM for the Sixers in years? I mean, when Larry Brown was here, was that really Billy King, or was that Larry Brown pulling the strings and telling Billy King what to do? Because as soon as Larry Brown wasn't here anymore, Billy King made some questionable decisions, right? So, has Philadelphia really had a great GM in the last 20 years? I don't know. But I wasn't a fan of Hinkie for a couple different reasons. I respected his vision, but I just wasn't a fan of how he went about executing that vision at times. I thought Colangelo was the biggest nepotistic hire in the history of, if not the Sixers, the history of the NBA. I mean, that was just ridiculous. So I have an appreciation for Elton Brand. I appreciate his candor. I appreciate his honesty. I appreciate the fact that he handles himself in a very professional manner. So I think very well of Elton Brand. I don't know if the Sixers are going to win an NBA championship with Elton Brand, but I'm at least going to give the guy a chance. And there were a couple things that Elton Brand said today that really kind of made you, think a little bit. Made you step back and say, well, that's interesting. Among the things that Brand said, Number one, they're in no rush to bring in a head coach. Let's put that out there real quick. So all the people who are naming names and making reports and putting all this stuff out there, not that, guys like Shams and Woj and all these guys aren't reputable, but it's initial reports. The process is going to play out, for lack of a better term. I know that word process is, basically, hedonistic at this point for some of you Sixer fans, but in the general Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of process, this is a process to find a new head coach. And that's the number one thing I'm glad he said today. I love the fact that Brand is not in a rush to hire a head coach. Because number one, with everything that's going on in 2020, with COVID, with the NBA in a bubble and everything else, I feel much more comfortable them taking their time than trying to find the next guy. My number two takeaway from what Brand said was he talked about them strengthening the organization from top to bottom and that there's a potential restructure coming on. That was something that Woj reported about yesterday, and I thought that was very interesting because he's not just confirming what was previously reported. He's also overtly putting out there that there's changes coming and that they need to make the organization better. And there were a lot of holdovers from the Colangelo era in that front office. And I think that it's become more and more apparent that the Colangelo people and Colangelo himself might have actually done more harm than good to this organization, because if Elton Brand is the last man standing, right? If he's the, to use the term from Highlander, he is the last one. He is the one, right? You've eliminated all the other people. You have to wonder how many of the moves that were made in the last year plus was actually Elton Brand and how much of it was the collective. How much of it was the group making these assessments. And if you are getting rid of the collective, there's something to be said for a fact that Elton Brand hasn't been giving a fair shake. That Elton Brand hasn't been allowed to execute the job to the fullest. And part of that was because he was a rookie. Part of it was because he was very new at the job. But now, with more time under his belt, with multiple months, multiple situations, multiple scenarios, multiple conversations that have passed with this organization between him and the people in the front office and the ownership, Elton's now in a position to maybe really lay out what his vision is. And I purposely use that term vision because the 76ers have been through so much upheaval over the last several years that you have to wonder how much of this organization was really who was running things, whose vision was being executed. Was there any vision for what was being executed? And I think it's a very strong contrast between the Philadelphia Flyers and the 76ers, because you look at what happened with one team, which was the Flyers. Ron Hextall came in here with a definitive vision, with a definitive plan, with a specific strategy. And as time played out, some of the elements of his vision and his plan and his strategy didn't work out. And you have to think about what happened next. More reports started coming out. They made a huge change, a hard change. They went and got an outsider, a non-Flyers guy, for a GM and then later a head coach. And it's worked out. The change in vision was able to take the team from the Hextall era to the next level. And hopefully a lot of people would believe that for the Flyers, that it will follow the same pattern as the Phillies when you went from the Ed Wade era to the Pat Gillick era. Pat Gillick was able to take the years of the Ed Wade roller coaster ride and elevate the franchise to a championship contender. And that's what the hope is for the Philadelphia Flyers. The Sixers have taken a much, much, much different path of getting there. As Bobby Marks told Mike Gill and Hunter Birdie yesterday on the Sports Bash, the organization's gone through a lot of philosophical change over the last few years.
When you go through, with Sam Hinkie and then Brian Colangelo, and then you have Elton Brand, and you have basically three different philosophies in how to build out a roster, that certainly does not help, but it's a ruthless business.
You could argue that you may have still been working off of part of the Colangelo philosophy with some of the Colangelo hires in that front office. I'm not sold on this idea that this was all Elton Brand anymore. I was under the impression that Elton Brand maybe had a little bit more autonomy than I previously thought. But now, after some of the things that Elton Brand said to the media, after some of the things that Brand talked about, that the collective ideas are over, that we're going to, change how the decision making is done in the organization, you really have to step back and think about exactly what this organization is going to look like moving forward. And I'm very intrigued to see what happens, because one of the things Elton Brand said again during his immediate availability, he wanted to balance the analytics with the basketball minds. That he wanted to change how the organization was run. And when he referred to Brett Brown, he said it was a good man, but it was time for a new voice, a new perspective. This has a huge feel to me of the one thing that Sixer fans hope for. And whether you're somebody listening on the radio right now, whether you're listening on the app, whether you're listening wherever you are, you know who you are. We've all heard the analogies about taking that next step, the organization moving from step A to step B. Jordan never won with Doug Collins, and Steph Curry never won with Mark Jackson, and the Pistons won with Larry Brown and not with Rick Carlisle, right? Del Harris could get the Lakers only so far, and Phil Jackson had to come in and win with them. Nick Nurse got them farther than Dwayne Casey did. I mean, there's 100 examples in the NBA of new coach coming in, elevating team where they couldn't go before. And organizations changing people in the front office, changing people in the head coaching situation. There is a genuine opportunity for the Sixers to move forward. And I'm encouraged by the reality that the Sixers are going to try to do things the right way, the better way, a way that is going to benefit the organization long term. I'm excited about giving Elton Brand the opportunity to show what he can do. And hopefully Elton Brand will be given the full length of opportunity, unlike Sam Hinkie with his plan. And also, there won't be any craziness as there was during the Colangelo years. Or shall I say, haphazard, backwards way of running a basketball team. Josh Hennig here, Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN. The PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open at 609-403-0973. Your thoughts on the Sixers, who should be their next head coach, Brett Brown's firing, Elton Brand, also the Flyers, an embarrassing loss last night. They'll be back on the ice tomorrow, 3 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN for Game 2 of that series. We'll talk more Flyers coming up on the other side as well. Game Night being brought to you at PlaySugarHouse.com. Place your legal sports bets at PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now and they'll match your first deposit up to $250. That's PlaySugarHouse.com for all your sports betting. Also, real-time casino games. You want to play slots and any of those things, you would go to the casino to play. You can do it right there at PlaySugarHouse.com. That's when we're in order to play. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Text board 609-403-0973. We'll dive deeper into the Sixers as well with Jason Blevins, our Sixers insider from 97.3 ESPN.com. Coming up at 6:40 here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Seattle City.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Usually how this process goes is that you're getting hammered with questions from the front office and ownership. But if I'm a head coach prospect, asking a lot of different questions here, guys, as far as, are we married to this roster? Can we get out of some of these contracts? Do I have the tax mid-level to use? What are we doing with finances going forward? What's the future of Elton in that front office there? So it's not that cut and dry where all of a sudden it's job number one that's going to be available.
Bobby Marks yesterday on the Sports Bash. The Sixers might not be the number one job available. That's an unpopular take, but it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of unknowns with the 76ers when it comes to this organization. So it doesn't surprise me that a guy who worked in the league for almost 20 years like Bobby Marks would say the Sixers might not be the number one job. Josh Hennig, Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN. PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board is open at 609-403-0973. You look at some of the guys who are going to be candidates out there. We've heard about guys like Ty Lue. We've heard Jay Wright. We've heard about other people like Mark Jackson. We've heard about Sam Cassell. The full list right now is at 97.3 ESPN.com of different candidate options out there. But whoever that is, what Bobby Marks said is very interesting. Usually the way it works is you're being asked a lot of questions. But in this situation, it might be the candidate asking the Sixers a lot of questions. And I can't blame anybody for going with that mentality, because when you look at the situation here with the Sixers, we all have more questions than answers when it comes to this team. And like I said, when you go through multiple visions, when you go through multiple eras of the organization, you do have to wonder what the long-term plan is. And listen, at the end of the day, it's going to be tough, and it's going to be interesting what they do. This was Bobby Marks yesterday on the potential candidacy of Ty Lue for the Sixers head coaching opening.
Certainly, if you look outside of the box, then you're probably looking at, probably Ty Lue, who is in Cleveland and has been able to handle rosters in the past that have been a little bit hamstrung from financials. Of course, you had LeBron.
Throws it, of course, at the end, LeBron. And as I said yesterday here on Game Night, look, whoever comes in here, they have a lot of issues to work through. Whether it's hiring a guy on the staff like Ime Udoka, whether it's going out and getting a current assistant like Sam Cassell, whether it's a former head coach like Ty Lue, whether it's a guy who hasn't coached in 6 years like Mark Jackson, whoever the candidate is, there's a lot of things to work through. It's not going to be a simple fix. We'll dive more deeper into the Sixers coming up at 6:40 with Jason Blevins, our 97.3 Sixers insider. Covered the Sixers for years now. Understands the organization better than most. We'll hear from him again coming up about 15 minutes from now. PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. For inquiring minds, the Phillies are currently losing in the top of the second, 1-0 to the Washington Nationals. Jake Arrieta on the mound for the Phils. I feel like the Phillies are one of those teams that there's just not a lot of juice, man. There's just not a lot of... I'm just not feeling it for this team. It just feels like this team has just really been questionable, man. It's just, I don't know what to do with this team anymore. One team I know something to do with is the Philadelphia Flyers. And when I'm saying that might be the worst game I've seen the Flyers play in about 2 years, I don't even think I'm exaggerating by saying that. The defense was horrible. The offense was worse. I mean, they were shut out by the Canadiens, but at least they didn't look totally out of place on the ice. They played not up to their abilities. They played poorly, but they didn't play horribly. So I'm very curious to see what exactly do the Flyers do to make adjustments, because it feels like every game, Alain Vigneault has been making adjustments, and I give him credit for his willingness to make adjustments. But at the same time, I'm just not convinced that after what I saw last night, I've seen what this Flyers team is going to be the rest of this series. I've seen too much good from them. I've seen them do too many things well to say that that game is completely an example of what that team is going to be long term. So, listen, I am not going to give up on the Flyers. I'm not selling them off. I'm not getting rid of their stock. I'm not saying that they stink. You can have a bad game. It's a 7-game series for a reason. It's not a one-off. And by the way, the one thing they did do well last night, I love the move by Vigneault pulling the goalie with 7 minutes left in the third period. Did it work out? No. But you gotta take risks. You gotta be willing to go all in to try to win games. We've seen multiple games in the Stanley Cup playoffs where teams come down from 3 goals at times. Just look at the Calgary-Dallas series. One team goes up 3, comes back and ties it. The other team goes up by 3. It's a seesaw. We saw in the Toronto-Columbus series, the seesaw battles. Team gets a big lead, team comes and ties it, they go to overtime. There's nothing that says the Flyers could have done the same thing. And there's no way you can convince me that Varlamov is some great elite goaltender. Okay? Get out of here with that garbage. That dude is a solid to good NHL goaltender. He is not Carey Price. The Islanders played very good defense last night, and I will give them that. The Flyers had one good period out of those 3 periods. They got outplayed in the first, and they got totally embarrassed in the third period. The Flyers played well for 1 period, and that was it. The rest of the game was a complete embarrassment. So I'm going to chalk it up to this team has to get better. And getting better starts with the one thing I pointed out previously. I dislike them not having Hennig in the lineup. I don't understand why you would take one of your best defensemen out of the game. And I'm not saying one guy would have made a complete difference last night, because the team as a whole lost that game on multiple fronts. But you cannot tell me that having a defensive-minded and very sure skater like Hennig in the lineup wouldn't have mattered last night. Maybe they don't lose as much as they did. Maybe they lose 2-0 instead. But I think Hennig could have made a difference last night, because the defensemen out there looked lost at times. Sean Couturier probably played his worst game as a Philadelphia Flyer in 3 years. It felt like every button that Alain Vigneault pushed last night just was not working. And you know what? Maybe it just wasn't the Flyers' night. Maybe the Islanders just came in with such a great game plan that they totally outplayed and outmaneuvered the Flyers, because Barry Trotz is that good of a hockey head coach and a strategic mind. But guess what? Now it's time for Alain Vigneault to step up. This is why Alain Vigneault was brought here, for this moment right here. This is why Alain Vigneault is a candidate for Coach of the Year. There's a reason why this team has played so well for the stretches they have. There's a reason why this team has not lost back-to-back games in almost 8 months. It's because Alain Vigneault has found a way to get this team to turn around each and every time. And I'm choosing to believe that he will find a way. But it starts with Robert Hennig in the lineup. Now, I am curious, something that Pete Thompson, Hunter Brody, and Mike Gill talked about just about an hour ago on the Sports Bash. Why exactly is JVR in Vigneault's doghouse? I would love to know if there's more to this than we know about, because James Van Riemsdyk is a talented hockey player. And I'm not just saying that because he's the Jersey guy. I'm saying that because James Van Riemsdyk is a guy who has showed you in the NHL that he has specific skills that play at a high level. Last season, he did score 27 goals for a reason. I don't understand exactly what happened from last year to this year. 66 games in 2018-19, 66 games in 2019-2020. You go from 27 goals to 19 goals. It's an interesting drop-off when you have the exact same number of assists, 21. Your plus-minus went from -10 to +5. It's a pretty big jump. Now your shots go down a little bit. Interesting note. How about the power play? Well, the power play is cut in half. You went from 8 power play goals the year before to 4. Interesting. You blocked more shots than the year before. You had less hits. So statistically, you can't really read into what the deal is. On the ice, I got to admit, he looks a little lost sometimes. It's pretty obvious that the style of play that Vigneault wants to play, JVR might not be a fit. And I'm curious to see what happens with him after this year. I would not be surprised if the Flyers trade him in the offseason. I don't know how they can do it because I know he's got a pretty interesting contract, but I'm very interested in why exactly he's not fitting in, because one of the problems the Flyers had versus the Canadiens, something they got to get back to with the Islanders, when they had success against Carey Price, it was because they were crashing the net. It was because Voracek and guys like him were getting in front of the goaltender, shielding him away from shots on the outside. JVR, in my eyes, is a guy who can do that. He's a guy who can go crash the net, get in front of the goaltender, be a big body, be a power forward in the hockey sense, and go out there and really muck it up. He's not a small guy. He's a guy who can go out there and get a little physical. He is 6'3". He's not Travis Konechny, right? But for some reason, in this Flyers system, he's not able to do that. And I understand he's got 3 years left on that contract at $7 million each. But I'm really wondering right now, no matter whether the Flyers make it to the Stanley Cup Finals or not, I really don't know exactly where JVR is that we've seen in the past. The guy we saw with the Flyers the first time, the guy we saw in Toronto, the guy we saw last year, that's a power forward. That's the guy who's crashed the net. That's the guy who's a legitimate weapon on offense, and he's non-existent. Meanwhile, guys like Tyler Pitlick look way better suited for Alain Vigneault's system, and you can't tell me that Tyler Pitlick is on the same talent level as a guy like JVR. So I have questions about this team. I have questions about exactly what this Flyers team is going to look like tomorrow at 3 p.m. But one thing I do know, Alain Vigneault is going to make changes. Will his changes be enough? We'll find out tomorrow right here on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins at 3 p.m. following the hour of the Sports Bash. I'll come on following the Flyers game and talk about the Flyers win or lose here on Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN. And one more little tidbit about the game tomorrow. I mentioned Robert Haig. One of my favorite things about Haig as a defenseman is the fact his willingness to do whatever it takes, whatever the team needs. Is he a guy that can be physical? Yes. Is he a guy who can go out there and lay the wood on somebody and bang him up? Yes. But if he doesn't have to do it, he won't do it. He does whatever the team needs him to do. He's a guy who goes out there and blocks shots. He's a guy who goes out there and puts his body on the line for the team. He's unafraid to go out and hit people. don't think it's a coincidence he led the team in hits this past season. But he's a guy who I feel like showcased his value to this team. And I think last night only proved that he has to be out there if this team wants to make a deep playoff run. Again, Flyers tomorrow afternoon, 3 p.m., and then the game after that, Thursday night at 7 p.m., all here on 97.3 ESPN. PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Josh Hennig here, hanging out with you for up until 7 o'clock. We'll lead you into Spain and Fitz on ESPN Radio. And then tonight, we have Mavs-Clippers Game 5. No Porzingis tonight. Interesting game. Be another game without the zinger out there for the Mavs. Can Luka be a hero again? Will the Kawhi and the Clippers step up and embrace what everybody expects them to be able to do, which is possibly win an NBA championship? We'll find out tonight. You hear all the action starting at 8:30 on 97.3 ESPN. Coming up next, we'll get back to the Sixers, Elton Brand, and more. Jason Blevins, Sixers Insider, joins us next. This is Game Night on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Welcome back to Game Night. Our conversation with Jason Blevins here coming up is being brought to you by Cross County Connection, the region's Transportation Management Association. They're dedicated to improving the quality of life in South Jersey through transportation solutions. Learn more at www.driveless.com. Cross County Connection, sponsors of Sixers coverage right here on 97.3 ESPN. Jason Blevins, Sixers Insider, 97.3 ESPN.com. Also the Painted Lines. Joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I felt like I feel a little bit more positive about the Sixers, despite how some of the fans are feeling potentially after some of the things Elton Brand said. I like the candor, I like the honesty, and I like the genuineness coming from a GM position that, frankly, you could argue the Sixers actually haven't had a legitimately good GM in 20 years.
I see a lot of positives in Elton as an executive for the long term. I think he's been in this position really for 2 years, and he's not that far removed from being a player. So there's obviously a lot of learning on the fly, and I think the most positive takeaway for today would be that he's actually going to be able to put his own stamp on the decision making. And I think he was part of a committee for his first 2 years. So right or wrong, the next year will determine his legacy, I think pretty strongly. But, as an executive, forget the basketball side of it, but just as a leader, there's a lot of positives around Elton Brand as a person. I think he's going to be fully in charge, which I think is necessary. I think the collaborative approach only works when there are very clear, very simple things. And basketball just moves too fast for that. Everybody knows what everybody else is doing. Everybody's playing counters. So I think this is his sink or swim year.
Part of the sink or swim is going to be who they hire for the next head coach. Another positive I took from him, he says they're going to take their time. They're not going to rush into it. And I like that, Jason, because I don't want to see this team just go out and get a name. I want them to get the right guy for this team, the players, the organization, that guy to be part of Elton Brand's vision.
Right. Yeah, I think the only caveat to that would be, you've got a couple of roster decisions that you need to make, and you need input from a coaching staff on how they would utilize certain players. So I don't think it's a 2013 situation where you can afford to take 5 months looking for someone, but there's certainly no need to fill that vacancy over the next, even 2-3 weeks. I agree. I don't think they should be naming someone in the next 2 days. And if they do, that means they already knew who they were going to have before they fired Brett.
How much is the NBA's decision to push back the start of their offseason potentially impact what the Sixers are going to do?
I think it's really important for them to settle on a schedule for not just the Sixers, but any team that's sort of in flux. Because, setting that sort of training camp date, that draft date, well, maybe the draft is already set, but the free agency period, all of those kind of things are gonna drive how quickly you need to make other decisions. Like, how do you fill spots in the front office around Elton Brand? We're assuming that many of the holdovers from Brian Colangelo will leave. That's not a certainty, obviously. We're assuming that most of Brett's staff on the coaching side will leave. So knowing when the season starts, knowing when training camp starts, it sort of puts everybody on the clock as far as hiring the best people and how quickly you need to move. Because there's a balance between due diligence and, if Tyronn Lue, for example, is the best available coach and the best person to sort of shepherd your two superstars, then you don't want to sit around and wait and have Chicago or, name another team with a vacancy come in and scoop them up.
Right. New Orleans, Brooklyn, whoever else might fire their coach in the next few days. This whole thing is a very ebb and flow situation. But speaking of Ty Lue, is there a name among the rumored names out there, whether it's a Ty Lue or a Jay Wright or there's a handful of Sixer fans who thinks Mark Jackson is the savior for some reason or whatever. Is there a guy of the names that you think fits the Sixers situation the best?
Well, I think if you look at Ty Lue's record with LeBron James, it's really good. And Ben Simmons is part of that clutch universe and has many of the same just the advanced IQ for the game of basketball. And Ty Lue may be able to relate to someone like Ben really well. Outside of that, I think, I'm not sure I see why Jay Wright would want that job, to be honest. He's got the dream job right now, and he's got very little pressure, and he's got virtually no chance of being fired at Villanova. So why would he take that risk? It would be a pure ego move, and I'm not sure that you'd want a guy that was doing it just to prove himself. Maybe you do. I don't know. But then you have guys like Stan Van Gundy who have had real success with talented big men in the past. In Dwight Howard, Dwight Howard's never been the same, I think, since he left, since Stan Van Gundy was no longer his coach. And then Andre Drummond looks like barely a useful player. And early in his career, he looked really good with Stan. So, those are a couple of the options. And then you look at Dave Yeager, who had real success with Marc Gasol in Memphis. And Marc Gasol really is the player that Joel Embiid patterns himself after. I know a lot of we talk about him in relation to Hakeem and Shaq, but really, if you want to look at the first goal for Joel, it would be Marc Gasol, and Yeager had real success with him. So those would be the guys that would be on my initial sort of interview list. And all of them have flaws. Otherwise, they would, be coaching right now, still in the playoffs.
Really quick before we move on, because we only got a few minutes left in the show, I want to ask you about Yeager. Yeager is a guy that I think is a very interesting, great basketball mind, but the history of his poor relationships with the front offices, the rumors that Mark Jackson had a poor relationship with the Warriors front office. I feel like in many situations, the relationship between the head coach and Elton Brand is going to be utterly essential for the Sixers moving forward.
Yeah, but on the flip side of that, you had a guy that really catered too much to the players and their feelings, and you might need someone that comes in and kicks a chair and turns over throws a water bottle and shakes these guys up. Because there is a legitimate sort of observation around that their two stars were coddled a little bit by Brett Brown. So, I'm not saying it wouldn't go south and that Yeager would be a 10-year head coach, but I think, there might be some value just in having a cage rattling coach. But I think Ty Lue could also do that. There's some stories around how he stood up to LeBron. But I think that's going to be an important element to whoever you bring in.
Absolutely. He's Jason Blevins joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at jblevins, NBA Sixers Insider, 97.3 ESPN.com. Also the Painted Lines. That leads me to my final question for you, Jay, because you mentioned about rattling. First of all, those who don't know about Ty Lue, what he did in Cleveland, go read Return of the King, because there's a lot of interesting insights in there that Windhorst and McMenamin wrote about Ty Lue's relationship with the players I think a lot of people don't know about. But you mentioned about rattling the cages. We've heard multiple times. Josh Richardson mentioned it. We heard Tim Legler last week on the Sports Bash mention it. Bobby Marks said it yesterday. Multiple media outlets. That word accountability. How important is it to change the accountability aspect when it comes to this team, not just with the superstars, but with the entire organization?
Yeah, I think it's huge. And going back to early on, we talked about sort of that collaborative front office. That's the problem with having, too many cooks in the kitchen. No one fully takes the blame for decisions. The blame is too easy to spread out, and therefore you don't have the same sort of pressure to get things right. So I think Josh Richardson talked about it most openly starting in January, about sort of the communication issues, the lack of willingness for the locker room to step up and solve their own problems. And that, I think that a top-down sort of heavy-handed coach may help them galvanize themselves if they're afraid of upsetting the coach.
He's Jason Blevins, covered the Sixers for years now, knows all the ins and outs of the team. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at jblevinsnba. Sixers Insider, 97.3 ESPN.com, and the Painted Lines. And as all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Jason, I appreciate you making the time today, and we'll chat soon.
Hey, thanks. Talk soon.
Josh Hennig, Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN. Game Night being brought to you by GMS Law. Make the right call. With 4 convenient locations to serve you, visit gmslaw.com. As we wrap up Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN, I am serious when I say I do like the name of Dave Yeager. I just want to make sure that whoever the Sixers hire, and he's right, Jay is right, they need it to be someone who's tough. They need it to be someone who's going to come in here and put their foot down when things get crazy, when things go sideways. There is an accountability issue with this team. There's an accountability issue with Joel Embiid. But there's an accountability issue with Ben Simmons as well. And I think at some point, somebody has to come in here and tell these guys, Joel, you have the potential to be the best player in the league. At least at worst, the best big man in the league. You need to put in the mindset and the work to put it out there and showcase that. And to turn on to Ben Simmons and say, Ben, I need you to play like an NBA point guard in 2020 and not an NBA point guard from 1975, okay? I think that whether it's Dave Yeager, Ty Lue, somebody's got to come in here and tell those guys to stand up. One of the things I love about Alain Vigneault with the Flyers is that he's a no-nonsense guy. He's not a guy who's going to take a lot of stuff from his players. He's going to go in there, tell the guys what it is, and tell them what's up. And tell them it is what it is, get over it, move out of the way if you don't like it. That's probably part of the reason why JVR is in the doghouse, and I'm just speculating. But, when you think of the Sixers, they need a similar kind of head coach. Again, I love the fact that Blevins brought up Dave Yeager. I just am curious. The guy has a history of having difficult relations with the front office, both in Memphis and in Sacramento. Remember, he got in a fight with the assistant GM at a practice and then banned him from a practice in Sacramento. But you know what? Maybe you need that kind of volatility with Philadelphia. You know, some volatility, maybe some arguments. Maybe that's good, for the morale to get guys to wake up a little bit. Josh Hennig here, Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. I'll be on tomorrow night following Flyers hockey. Game 3, 3 p.m. tomorrow, 97.3 ESPN. Have a good night.